everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted to end negative thinking and liberate your true creativity, then do we have the Joy of Genius show for you. Today I'll be talking with Gay Hendricks, PhD, the best-selling author and co-author of more than 40 books, a leader in the field of relationship transformation and body-mind therapies for more than 45 years, and the author of a brilliant new book, The Joy of Genius. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about how to liberate your true creativity and discover your genius by ending negative thinking. That plus we'll talk about Coach Whitey Smith, Dr. Dwight Webb, the power of geckos, riffing Rolodexes, prison guards and head monks, legal pads and big pens, Rembrandt and Van Gogh, John Wayne, Gary Cooper and Humphrey Bogart, bamboo blowguns and Incan whistles, and what in the world Greta and Ollie have to do with anything. Gotcha. So welcome back to the show, Gay. Are you ready to shine?
I am really ready to shine, and I appreciate the introduction. I really, it made me chuckle deep in my heart.
Woohoo! My job is done. Forget about the brilliant questions. We're going for the chuckle in the heart today. So, however, on that note, would you mind telling us about your earliest years growing up and who you grew up with?
Yes, well, I was born in a sleepy little town in Florida called Leesburg, which is about 40 miles west of Orlando. And it's grown a lot since I lived there. When I lived there, it was a little town of about 8,000 or 10,000 people. And my ancestors had lived there for 3 generations. So they're very established people there. And my mother, in fact, was the mayor of Leesburg for a while.
Oh, wow.
And so that's where I grew up. And then I grew up, I had a problem, a medical problem when I was growing up, which was a very fat kid. I was one of those babies that by the end of the first year, I was, like in the top 2% of baby weights. And then by the time I was 5, I was visibly obese. And nobody could figure out why, because everybody else in my family was skinny. It wasn't until much later that they found out it was a combination of thyroid problems and pituitary gland problems and stuff that had happened to me before I was born. And so, but that took a long time to get handled. And so I was taken around to a lot of different medical experts. But I think inside I felt pretty happy. And I always had a lot of creativity. People were always like, I was the kid in the neighborhood where all the other kids would gather, and then we'd figure out what games we wanted to play. And I would usually assign the roles, you be the bad guy today, and you be the gunslinger, and you be the stranger from out of town. And so I think that's how I got into a lot of my early imaginative fiction writing career, too, because now I write mystery novels in my spare time. And so, but in those days, we grew up in this town, and I had an older brother, 8 years older. So by the time I kind of got up to 7 or 8 years old, he was already gone and heading out to college. So I was sort of an only child, and I had a kind of an unusual upbringing in the sense that everybody in my family lived within a literal stone's throw of each other, a large property where my grandparents had lived since the turn of the century, and then my mother had built her house, and my aunt had built her house, and another aunt. And so it's kind of a compound. And so I had within, a 10-second walk, really, I could be over at my grandmother's house. And so I grew up in that kind of a family where I sort of floated around from place to place. And my mother was quite a very busy professional woman, and she didn't have a lot of time to mess around. And so I spent a lot of my time over at my grandmother's house. And so those were the early years of my life. And then when I went away to college, I was still fat. And it wasn't until I had an enlightenment experience when I was 24 years old that my body started to change, and I was able to lose 100 pounds and really transform things. But I carried that weight around until I was 24 years old.
Would you mind sharing what that experience was?
No, I'd love to share it. What happened? Okay, so roll the clock back to the year of 1969.
All right.
And at the time, you probably weren't even born then, I won't ask, but I was a teacher at a boarding school for delinquent boys in New Hampshire. And I was kind of the counselor at the end of the dorm with 24 boys. And then I taught all day long. And so it's kind of like a 24-hour job. but the benefit was I got a free place to live. And so in those days, I owed a lot of student loans. So it was really great. I didn't have to pay any rent or anything. And so I was teaching there, and I still was carrying around, I weighed 320 pounds, believe it or not. By the way, I weigh 180 now. And so 140 pounds ago, I was a much bigger person. And one day I went out for a walk, and I was trying to clear my head after I had a big argument with the woman I then lived with, a woman named Linda. And we'd been together 4 years, and we'd been married for a couple of years. And I had pretty much constant conflict with her. At the time, I was really out of touch with my feelings. And, so it was one of those things where I think we were two very unconscious people kind of duking it out because we didn't have the slightest idea who we were inside. And so we fought constantly. And one day I went out for a walk, and it had just snowed. And I was walking down this country road, and I stepped on a place where the snow had covered a patch of ice, and my feet shot out from under me, and I went down, bam, on my back and bounced the back of my head off the ice. And actually, I didn't knock myself out, but I saw stars. I don't know if you've ever had that experience. I thought it was a cartoon thing until I banged my head once, and actually, it sets off a little explosion of stars. And so, but as I say, I didn't knock myself unconscious. It put me in kind of an altered state, though, where for about 2 minutes, I was kind of out of my ego and out of who I thought I was. And in that 2 minutes, I could see down through all the levels of myself. I saw that this outer part of me had a lot of tense muscles to it, and I saw that was covered with a lot of fat. But the reason I was so fat was because I was trying to insulate myself against all these feelings I didn't want to contact inside myself. And I could see down through those in this magic moment. I saw down through them to what I would call pure consciousness. So I could see that I was angry. There was a layer of anger. Then there was a layer of sadness under that. And then under that was a big layer of fear. And I had never contacted any of those before. I mean, I was like completely oblivious to those until this moment. And so I saw down through to this place that I call pure consciousness, where there was nothing. It was just like our being. And I hung out there for a while. And as I say, it was probably under 2 minutes, but I just remember hanging out in that beautiful, pure space of openness for a while. And then I found myself slowly kind of remembering my body and realizing I was cold, and I could feel my head hurting back there where I banged it on the ice. And so I guess my personality was reassembling itself.
Yeah.
And I came back and I realized I craved a cigarette. And then I realized, oh, I got to go back home now because I'm cold and I'm going to face the same situation. So anyway, it was like coming back to my regular old self. But here's what happened. Here's the part that I think people can really learn from. As I was coming out of it, I made a commitment. I said, I'm going to do whatever it takes to feel like that all the time, to feel that sense of pure consciousness. And so that commitment started everything. And so what happened after that was like a million moments of magic to me, even though some of them were incredibly painful, like getting out of the relationship. That had its own pain and drama.
I've got to ask, what did you tell Linda when you came home?
Yes, that was a big item. I came back and I tried to communicate what had just happened. And I remember she kind of looked like, like whatever. And I realized we were communicating on such different levels and always had been. And I felt in that moment that we always would be, that the purpose of our lives had been to bring us to this point, but we didn't have a future together. And in a sense, I think I got divorced in that moment, even though it took me, a year or two to work out all the painful details of it and get legally detached from the relationship and move and all that kind of stuff. So there were a tremendous amount of painful details. And yet at the same time, I think that if I have a commitment, if my commitment is to create this sense of pure consciousness in myself, I need to do whatever it takes in order to make that happen, because that commitment felt sacred to me. Like if I didn't do it, I would die. And I realized also when I was lying on the ground there that I was replaying my father's life. He had died at age 32, extremely obese, smoking heavily, in a painful relationship, in a job he didn't like very much. In other words, I was hitting every single thing that was wrong with his life already. He died at age 32. I was 24. Was I going to even beat him to it? And so I realized also I'm going to find my own life. I'm going to find out who I really am under here. So for the next year, I ate only food that I hadn't eaten before. You know, like for me, a meal was a hamburger and French fries and a milkshake.
Yeah.
So I stopped eating that kind of stuff, and I would eat a bowl of apples cut up, or a bowl of blueberries, or I remember once I lived in New Hampshire at the time, where produce costs about 10 times more than it does out here in California where it's grown. So I remember one time in the supermarket seeing this cantaloupe. And, oh my goodness. But at the time it was like $2.50 in 1969, you know, so it'd be like a $20 cantaloupe today. But I went ahead and bought it, you know, because I'd never had it in a long time. So I ate all these foods that were good for me. You know, I discovered fruits and vegetables and things like that. And I had a few slip-ups along the way. I don't know if I mentioned this in the book, but I hope it doesn't gross out your viewers. But one day I was about, 35 pounds I'd lost, something like 35 pounds. And so I was feeling better and better and better. And I was in Boston in Harvard Square, and I passed the Brigham's ice cream store.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, you probably had Brigham's.
Well,
Yeah.
I grew up in Danvers, just up the road, so I spent a lot of time in Cambridge, so I know Brigham's well. Actually, I worked for Brigham's once. I got tendonitis, a whole nother story.
Well, God bless Brigham's. I hope they're still in business. I suspect they probably are. But anyway, it's delicious ice cream. And I saw this little family in there, about maybe 4 people, a couple little girls, a couple of parents, and they were eating this gigantic banana split. Mm-hmm. It was like I went into a hypnotic trance, and I went right in. I want that one, I said. And so I ate this banana split. And you can imagine after a month and a half of pure eating, suddenly this banana split hits my stomach. For about 20 minutes, I was in absolute ecstasy. And then I was walking down the sidewalk and actually doubled over in pain, and had to stop there for a while. So that was probably like an alcoholic falling off the wagon and how you feel the next day. But I felt it took me 3 or 4 days to detox it. But it took me a while before I made that mistake again. Mm-hmm. So gradually over the course of a year, I lost 100 pounds and now have lost 140 pounds. Most of it was a long time ago. So for many, many years, I've been at a good weight. I'm about 6 feet tall. So 180 pounds is a good sort of athletic weight on me.
So what was your roadmap? You come back home, and I've had very different but similar in ways experiences with a couple NDEs, and I would say integration is a bleep. What was your roadmap? How did you stumble forward or figure out how you were going to keep this commitment?
That's the kind of question I love to get asked. And I want to tell you, I appreciate a great question because I do a lot of interviews. And so it's like lighting a big room of illumination comes on when I get a good question like that. So just for the sacredness of this moment, I'd like you to phrase that question again for the kinesthetic people in the audience.
Once you have had such an experience, it becomes painful to try to figure out how to live the old life and you feel like you're stumbling along trying to figure out and to honor your commitment to the new life.
Yes, and here's what I discovered, that it must be done almost one breath at a time, but the commitment needs to be brought to life over and over again. I always tell my students, commitment will get you into the game, but it's recommitment over and over again when you stumble or deviate from your chosen path. So human beings are going to fall off the wagon. We're going to wander astray, and recommitment will get us back there. So here's what I discovered. Let me start with food.
Yeah.
For about a year, I used this as my metric about what I could eat. Does it feel like this is going to feed my spiritual body or my old obese body? In other words, is this going to feed the future of my evolution, or is it going to keep me stuck in the past? Because eating a giant Hershey $2.39 chocolate bar, that would feed my past big time, because I've done that. But my commitment was to this new thing, this living in a state of pure consciousness. And that became my sacred goal. And so I think every human being needs a sacred goal, something that they've chosen in their heart. And you can't have that imposed from outside. You've got to choose it yourself. And so whatever your religious programming is great and your spiritual teaching is great, but at some point you really have to choose your own path and say, this is my path and I'm going to pursue this with heart. It's like in my marriage. Katie and I are just celebrating our 38th anniversary. Yay. And yay. And I always tell her, I've had 38 years with you of waking up every day feeling like the luckiest man on earth. Because when we got together, we made this sacred commitment, which was to grow ourselves as individuals and also grow ourselves as a couple at the same time. So we made no sacrifice between individual growth and the growth of the relationship. And
can you handle a question within a question?
Absolutely.
Which is, do you recall the line or approximately what you said to her when you first met her? Because you were declaring this, and you were declaring a commitment to yourself and to positive future relationships in that breath.
Yes, the moment I met Katie, I had been observing her across the room. She was in a group of about 50 people where I was giving a talk. And she was the movement therapy instructor at the Institute for Transpersonal Psychology, where I was giving this talk in Menlo Park, California, 38 years ago. And she was also getting her PhD there. And so she was in the audience of a group of the PhD students and professors and that kind of thing. So I was giving this talk to them, and I kept going around the circle looking at people. And when I would come to her, it was almost like I was dazzled by her energy field. I don't really see auras, but this kind of special pulsation about her. And I came back a couple of times to look and see, is she as beautiful as I think she is? And so I kind of sneaked a couple of peeks at her. And so I made a little note in my mind, I got to figure out how to meet this woman and find out if she's in a relationship right now, because I was really attracted to her. So I gave my talk and we took a break. And on the break, I was going to go over and talk to her, but she happened to come across to ask me a question. And so to this day, we can't remember what the question was, because she came up to me and I said, I need to get a confession off my chest about something that's been happening for me over the past 45 minutes. And I said, I keep noticing you and I feel very attracted to you. And I was trying to figure out a way to come talk to you when you came across the room. But I want to let you know something. And in this moment, she's really hooked in the conversation, and so she probably hadn't had that much authenticity from a man in her entire 32 years of existence. And so I said, I want to tell you about something I've just made a commitment to, because a month before, I had just figured out what I was doing wrong in relationships that had them keep screwing up and what I could do differently. And I realized I didn't always tell the truth. And I blamed when stuff came up. I would blame the other person. And number three, I was always short circuiting my creativity in favor of the relationship. You know, I didn't go do my hour of writing every morning because I'd get caught up in a relationship argument. And so I'd been in and out of this particular relationship for 5 years. And so on this particular magic moment, the month before I met Katie, I'd made a decision. Okay, from here on out, I'm going to only create relationships in my life where both people tell the truth and are committed to that. Both people take responsibility for their lives so we don't blame. And both people are committed to their creativity as well as the relationship. So it's a mutual commitment. So we don't have to get smaller in order to fit into the relationship. And so those were my three criteria. And I said to the universe when I said this commitment, I said, maybe it's not in the cards for me to have this. Maybe there's something wrong with me that I can't do it. But I promise you, I'll never settle for less. So that was a month before I met Katie. So when I met her, I said, I got to tell you, I'd love to ask you out for a cup of coffee or something, but I want to tell you that I only want relationships where both people are committed to telling the truth. Both people are committed to taking responsibility for things rather than blaming the other person. And both people are committed to their own path of creativity as well as to the relationship. Yes. So on those terms, would you like a cup of coffee with me? And so she went like this. She went sort of like, and then she said, how about lunch? So I got paid off. I got a reward for my brazen act of authenticity. So it was my greatest little 30 seconds of authenticity, I think, in my entire life. But it had a great payoff now where we've been around the world 30 some times teaching our seminars and been on Oprah a bunch of times and, done the whole rigmarole and created several, successful businesses and things like that. So, at this stage of the game, we're really savoring the fact that, like we've lived in this house, we bought this house about 17 years ago, and we've never had a cross word in this house. Nobody's ever had an argument in this house, not even people visiting here. And so this house has a magical feeling to it. You can almost feel it when you walk in the door. I can, where it's kind of like this infinite pool of love that's been created. And people will walk in here to do an interview with us or something and say, wow, what's different about this place? And so I think it's the relentless practice of these principles we're talking about: being honest, taking responsibility, being committed to creativity. And if you're really committed to creativity, you just got to read The Joy of Genius, because it taps you directly into that creativity.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So on that note, what do pure consciousness, which you experienced, and creativity have to do with one another?
Pure consciousness is the birthplace of creativity. It's where creativity launches itself into form. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but sometimes, like if you're right on the edge of sleep or in the morning just before you wake up, you can actually see your thoughts, kind of like the thought bubbles forming in your mind. You see the first intention of them, and then a thought appears. And probably because you kind of slowed down and relaxed, but that's happening all the time. Things are manifesting from space. Things are coming into form from a place of spaciousness. And so I think that by opening up to pure consciousness, we also tap directly into the creative force in the universe, which is an awesome thing. I mean, think about it. I mean, this is, imagine that we live in a body that had a Mozart in it. That we live in the same species that had a Mozart or a Picasso or a Rembrandt. And I love to visit Rembrandt when I go to museums. And I just so much appreciate people who go to the edge with passion. They go to the edge of themselves to occupy the fullness of themselves. And so I believe that path the path of opening up to more pure consciousness in ourselves, in meditation, in movement, and whatever you can figure out to do that with, that opens us up and makes us more in touch with our creativity and makes us less censorious, I guess the word is, of our creativity. So many people censure themselves by criticizing themselves all the time. And that's not conducive to creativity, because if you mosquito bite all of your thoughts all the time, you get this kind of defensive posture in your mind against yourself. So we need to kind of welcome our creativity and celebrate it. I was talking to Jean Houston one time, a long time ago, and she was saying that she's traveled around the world 15 million miles, and she said in her experience that the great pain of the world is not poverty or hunger, it's lack of creative fulfillment, that people are creatively stifled, that they don't have their creativity awakened. And as I've traveled the world myself, I see the same thing. And so I want to do my part in helping people wherever they live open up to their creativity, to their spontaneous, open-hearted part of themselves that's the fountain of creative ideas inside.
I love it. On that note, you have a favorite quote here from Gospel of Thomas. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you.
It's true, isn't it? I mean, haven't you seen that? I see it all the time. And I feel a great sadness at one aspect of it, because I've worked with, cancer people and other illnesses and things like that were in the process of dying. And often they will tell me the same kind of thing, that I wish I'd written some poetry in addition to being a dentist, but people on their deathbeds don't say, gosh, I wish I'd spent more time in the office. It's usually about, I wish I'd acted on some of my creative impulses. I wish I'd bought a motorcycle, or, I wish I'd gone to Disney World. But it's a spark of creativity that I think needs to be nurtured inside ourselves. And I've been blessed in my life because early on I started thinking about these things. Like 24 years old is, it may sound late, but it's actually pretty early to kind of get a grip on your life and realize what life is all about. Because I work with people all the time in their 50s, 60s, 70s who haven't grasped that yet. And so it's never too late, though. So there's only this moment. And so whether you're 74 or 14, it's always the same process. It's one breath at a time of recommitting to opening that pure consciousness part of yourself. And so I think if we keep our attention right there on that aspect of things, just growing that in our lives, growing our experience of space in ourselves, instead of yama, 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 creating space in ourselves. I've been a daily meditator now since 1972 or 3. I can't remember exactly the year, but let's say 73 to be safe. And so what's that, about 45 years now. And I find that daily meditation is a great help with that. Even if all you do is you sit in the corner and count your breaths for 20 or 30 minutes, it's something that cultivates an inner spaciousness that is so important to life. The great philosopher Blaise Pascal said several hundred years ago that all of humankind's troubles come from not being able to sit in a room by ourselves for 10 minutes doing nothing. And so one of my students once figured out that I'd been meditating for some like 14,152 hours of my life. But every one of those is good to me because it was all one breath at a time and one moment at a time and one opening up to stillness. So it's probably like any other thing. If you want to be a good swimmer, go swim for 20 minutes a couple of times a day. If you want to be a good golfer, go out and practice. I'm in the process, I have been for the last 10 years, of learning to play golf. And I'm down to about a 15 handicap now. Wow. But it's in some way a maddeningly difficult game. Mm-hmm. It would seem to be easy because the ball is just sitting there. So you cannot blame it on the ball. You can't say, oh, the pitcher got one by me, or, oh, boy, he's in good form today, because the ball is just going to sit there staring at you. And so it's hard to be a projector. You can't say it's the ball's fault or the club's fault, although many of my colleagues do out there.
As we're talking about balls that don't move. We're talking about creativity. I want to talk about, well, you talk about a term in here called riffing Rolodexes. I want to talk about how we riff unhappiness, where it comes from, and how we get at that. Because my guess is if we're miserable, we may not have too much luck in the creativity department.
Yes, well, I think human beings need to realize that most suffering is optional. That there's a difference between pain and suffering. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, now this may also gross out some of your viewers, but when I go to the dentist, I don't like to use anesthesia, Novocaine. I'd rather just put up with the pain for a while, and I've learned to kind of breathe with it. And so when I experience the pain, instead of retreating from it and trying to get away, I go out to meet it. Mm-hmm. Since why not? It's going to be there anyway. So I go out to embrace it. And I remember my dentist one time was breaking in a new assistant there, and I was having quite a bit of pain, and I was going, and the dental assistant was getting a little freaked out, and the dentist paused and said to her, "Dr. Hendricks breathes when he's in pain." And she said, "Oh," like it was a new context for her. So I don't recommend that everybody do this. When I've had some procedures like root canals and things like that, I'll go for the hit of Novocaine.
I did it with 2 surgeries, one very successfully, a knee operation. The second one was a complete and total mistake. I'll put that in quotes, a great learning, which was a sinus operation.
Well, you're a braver man than I with that regard, because
former past tense.
Yeah, I've been. My wife and I have had the opportunity to be birth coaches when friends or clients and sometimes employees of ours have given birth, and I remember one situation where, halfway through a natural birth, the pain just got so much, and our very dear friend, who is the most organic, natural person, "Give me the drugs, get right now." and bless her heart, because you never want to go from pain into suffering, because suffering is trying to put the brakes on the pain.
Yeah,
it's participating is where your peace of mind comes from. That when you can participate totally with something and be with it and feel what it's all about, that's a type of awakening that I think we need to give ourselves in the process of living a conscious life. I really celebrate that moment in fact, in the book, I talk a lot about the genius move and the genius spiral and that kind of thing. And what I encourage people to do is look at these little moments of life, because they each have them. The moment where you get stuck is also the moment that has the breakthrough potential to enlightenment in it. So it's not about resisting those kinds of things. It's about opening up to them, because you see, what I've learned is that earlier in my life, I was so closed down to learning, to getting feedback, that the universe had to teach me with a sledgehammer.
Me too.
But once I opened up to learning from feedback and listening, like with women, I can't tell you how many women early in my life that I was going out with or dating, or in one case married to me, would say something like, "You never talk about your feelings." And I would get, it was like they were asking me to speak Chinese or Swahili, or a language I didn't speak. I did not know what that felt like until that moment on the ice. And then, whoa, was that a different world? Because then I began to say, I'm angry about this, or I felt sad, or I'm scared right now, or I feel so happy to see you. So I took the lid off, that little gauze between me and my feelings, and I realized, why not? What's the worst thing that can happen? Well, the worst thing that can happen is they can reject me. But if they're going to reject me for being real, I don't want them anyway. And so it was a win-win new way to go through life. And I wanted to get back to food for a second because I realized I departed that thought about 20 minutes ago. So I would ask myself with every bite of food, will this feed my spirit or my old self? And here is where you want to go beyond food, because I began to ask that question of friends and people I was around. And this is what you call ripping the Rolodex, because I had to let go of people I thought were friends because they were keeping me stuck in my old body, in my old paradigm. Like one of my friends, Ken Bouton, who, very sad story, came to visit me when I had lost about 75 pounds. And he took one look at me. I hadn't seen him in 6 months. So he had seen the 300 and some pound Gay, and now he was seeing the 225 pound version of me. So it was a striking difference. And so he was kind of dumbfounded. He was very obese himself. So he was 26 years old. He was about a year or so, maybe a couple of years older than I was. So he spent the night, and then the next day he went into town and he brought back a 5-pound box of chocolate caramels. I forgot to tell you a part of the story. When we were talking the first night he arrived, he asked me about my diet and everything, and I told him very excitedly about it. And he asked me sort of innocently, what kinds of things have you craved? And I said, oh, well, vanilla ice cream for sure, peanut butter. I used to live on peanut butter, and I still like it in more homeopathic doses now, but I realize too much of it kind of fills me up. And hot dogs, for sure. Could eat those by the half dozen. But he took note of the chocolate caramels. There happened to be in Rochester, New Hampshire, a factory that made chocolates. So he bought a 5-pound box of chocolate caramels and brought them back to me in an attempt to sabotage my diet. And he was quite a practical joker. He thought this would be a very funny kind of thing. It would be like, I view it kind of like bringing an open bottle of scotch to a guy who'd been free of alcohol for 6 months, And so I thought it was about that humorous. So I got mad at him and kind of threw him out, basically. And I realized I couldn't be around those kind of people anymore, that it just made me feel too toxic, because I was always living in that, does this feed my spirit or my old body? Does this feed my new awakening body? Does this feed pure consciousness, or does this feed obesity? And I started living in that question all the time, and I still actually do, because I've found it actually gets even more important the older I get, because especially 20 or 30 years ago, when we began to be successful in everything, we started getting about one person a week who would come here and pitch us on trying to invest in a magnificent new age project or something like that. So once you awaken, I think, to creativity, you have to draw certain boundaries around it. And so I've drawn certain boundaries around my life, which is that I only welcome people in here that have that quality of being on an infinite quest for pure consciousness. So it keeps my social life down to a manageable size, plus doesn't disturb the vibrations in the house.
I love that question, because I think I'm always asking, does this make me feel light? Does this make me feel heavy? Is this fear, or what would love do? Does this, I'm always talking about spiritual nutrition, about the nutritional value of everything. So the question, will this, and beyond food, way beyond food, will this feed my spirit, is genius. Let's go from there and let's talk about genius, or specifically, you have 4 or 5 steps to what you call genius. Can you walk us through those?
Yes. One step, the most key important step, is to begin with commitment. And when people come here to work with us, sometimes we get, executives will come here for 2 or 3 days of intense work where they're the only person we're working with, or sometimes it's a couple we're working with for a couple of days. But no matter who it is, whether they come from Saudi Arabia or Indonesia or Beverly Hills, it always begins with commitment. Because until a person has a heartfelt commitment, they are essentially rudderless. Mm-hmm. And what happens is many people up until maybe midlife, age 40, are running off of commitments that got put on them earlier in life from their parents or teachers or religion, but they've never fully chosen that in their own heartfelt depths of themselves. And so any kind of powerful personal change begins with commitment. So specifically in the area of genius, it would sound something like, I commit to living in my genius part-time, or I commit to living in my genius 30% of my time. Or if you want to go really big and bold and really flush up all your stuff, go, I commit to living in my genius all the time. And so pick a commitment that feels good to you. Here's what I do with clients who come here. I ask them to begin with only 10 minutes a day. And if all they do is go in a room by themselves and sit there for 10 minutes saying, what is my genius? What is my genius? What is my genius? If you just live in that question for 10 minutes, it's what I call a wonder question. It's a question with a huge answer, but it doesn't have a right answer.
How do you define genius?
Genius, the full use of yourself in all dimensions.
Thank you.
One thing, too, is genius in a way has gotten a bad rap because the media and movies always portray kind of a mad genius, like the mad genius in Back to the Future. And, there's always a mad genius around. And even in certain families, there's crazy old Uncle Fred or crazy Aunt Edna who's, she's a little cuckoo, but she's makes a lot of money drawing cat cartoons, or something like that. So I had an aunt like that. Cool. She was very, very cuckoo and also was facilitated by a quart or so of vodka a day, but she was very creative. So she was an outcast, and a lot of times geniuses get outcast. And so I want to make it part of the ordinary conversation because everybody's got that seed of genius in them. It's just that we waste our time doing stuff that isn't our genius. And like, you wouldn't believe, like even in an audience of, like I'll stand up in front of 500 relatively enlightened people in the sense that they're in the room, they managed to get in a car and come down there every day, and find the room. So, they're at least that conscious. And yet I'll say, how many of you are spending the large part of your day doing something that you don't like to do? Sometimes if people are bold enough to raise their hands, you'll see a good third of the audience sometimes. Oh, I just hate that because I've been there, and I've seen a lot of people be there. And I don't want anybody to spend another minute in doing that kind of thing because, like in The Big Leap, the book that the predecessor to The Joy of Genius, I identify these 4 different areas. One is the zone of incompetence, where you're doing stuff you're not any good at. I think we've all been there. For me, it was once trying to change a tire on the side of the road, which I'm hopeless at any kind of mechanical thing. And finally, some guy came along and helped me, but I felt so, out of my depth. We've got the zone of incompetence, and we've got the zone of competence, where you're doing stuff that you're pretty good at, but somebody else could do it just as well. So how much of your day are you spend doing that? Then this third zone, which is really a sticky trap, is the zone of excellence, where you're doing stuff that you're getting good feedback for, you're making good money at it, people give you pats on the back, people keep electing you to committees and wanting you to do more and more stuff. And you do that, and maybe you're a great success at it, but inside you feel something else gnawing at you, which you don't feel like your genius is being tapped into. And so some of the most unhappy people I've met are really successful people at age 40 or 50 or wherever they are. It doesn't have to be, it's often around 40 to 52, somewhere in there, where people kind of run up against the wall of their old personality. Blessings upon you if you can do it in your 30s or your 20s. I got lucky at 24. But wherever you are doesn't really matter. But one day you realize the pain of carrying my old personality is outweighing the joys of what it's bringing me. And so you have to then reinvent a new version of yourself. Now, you don't have to paddle off in a canoe to Tahiti and, dress in a sarong. That's what Paul Gauguin did, but that was 100 years ago. You don't need to do that. You probably couldn't afford a room in Tahiti anyway now. But you don't have to go to a cave in Tibet to meditate. You can sit down on the floor of your living room on a cushion or on an easy chair. It doesn't matter. One of my teachers, Krishnamurti, always said, if you can't meditate in a subway, you can't meditate. And so, so what we need to do is make life itself a process of meditation. And a good bit of that involves every moment opening up to whatever is there, whatever is trying to reveal itself to you, instead of shrinking back from it. One of my early mentors, Jack Downing, who is a great psychiatrist and a Gestalt therapist and one of the early Rolfers, he told me something once that has always guided my life. He said, most people have the mistaken idea that there are two faucets in life. One faucet is marked pleasure and one faucet is marked pain. And the idea of life is to turn up the pleasure faucet and turn down the pain faucet. And he said, but the reality of it is, he had learned, is that there's only one faucet and it says awareness on it.
Love it.
And you either open up that faucet or you keep it cranked down. And I think we all know people who are busily cranking down and becoming less conscious. But fortunately, there's this vast group of people, a worldwide conspiracy in the original sense of the word, people who breathe together. That's the original meaning of conspiracy in Latin. And so we are all breathing a new world into being here, which is a world of authenticity. It's like I said with Katie, authenticity first, then taking responsibility instead of blame, and then committing to our creativity. What if every politician in the world, what if that was their agenda? That's what gets me out of bed in the morning, is this idea of participating in the creation of a whole new world.
Woohoo! My mission as well. So bringing us back to genius, we've got first step, commitment. What's the next step that somebody who's come into your home, you're helping them step into their genius?
Well, remember the old story of the guy in New York for the first time, and he asked the cop, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? And the cop says, practice, practice, practice. And well, by the way, I want to challenge you about something, if I may, Michael.
Please do.
In the book, I talk about the genius spiral.
Yes,
and
yes.
You asked me to kind of lay things out in a linear fashion, but let me lay them out in a spiral fashion, because it's more like that. It's not like you have to accomplish one fully before you get to the next one. If you think of a learning spiral of going upward, you're going to pass by the same thing you may have passed by 10 years ago on another spiral, but you're more open by then, or you're more, the same argument might come up in a new relationship and you realize, oh, I don't care about that anymore. I don't care about being right anymore. And so we need to think of life that way, as so every other step involves some form of practice, because at every stage along the spiral, you're learning to adjust. You're learning to handle more and more energy. You're learning to be sensitive to the air currents. I live in a part of the world where oftentimes I can look up in the sky in the afternoon and watch a hawk riding wind currents around in a spiral. And actually, on the day of our marriage, Katie and I got married on a mountaintop in Colorado, actually. And as we were saying our vows to each other, two hawks came over and began circling over the top of us. I actually snapped a picture of it. I had my camera in my pocket because I was so blown away by it. So maybe that's where I got the original idea of the spiral, the genius spiral, but it works the same way, because if you watch the bird flying higher, they're being sensitive to the currents. They're making little momentary decisions about how much spirit can I accommodate? How much breath can I accommodate under my wings? And it's us in life also, that as we soar up, we're going to go past things that need our attention again. I was talking to a dear friend of mine the other day, and I said, how's life going? And he said, well, I've got 3 teenagers in the house, so take a wild guess. And he said, it's daily chaos here. And so I only had 1 teenager at the house at a time, but I could certainly relate to what he was saying. So wherever you are, you may be in that hard parenting phase, or you may be waking up next to somebody that you realize you should have never married in the first place. I've had people tell me that story so many times. Always there's what's to learn now. Mm-hmm. There's what needs to be open to in this moment. What is this moment trying to teach me? And the moment we can step away from needing to be right to, what do I need to learn here? I think, especially if you look out in politics and the rest of the big world out there, you see people need to learn the other side of blame, because blame is this move where you're saying, you are the reason I'm unhappy, and you have the political beliefs that are oppressing me, and you have the power that's keeping me from doing what I want to do. And yet a good bit of the time, it's about this, how am I imprisoning myself? How am I not open to the kind of freedom that I want you to give me? Those moments of really bringing it back over here, so that if you're spending all of your time out here like this and none of your time back in, I'm not talking about blaming yourself. I'm talking about wonder. I'm talking about, how can I be in such a way that this doesn't happen to me repeatedly? So those kinds of questions are what I call wonder questions, and those kinds I really advocate.
Beautiful. Before we start to wrap things up, what's a genius marker and a deathbed marker?
Yes. Well, let's start with deathbed markers. I've asked this question many times of people. Put yourself on your imaginary deathbed. Mm-hmm. Think about when you might die. Give yourself I think I might die when I'm 83, or I think I might die when I'm 92, or my body feels like it has 14 good years left in it. Or however you come to that, kind of pick a number and say, okay, transport yourself into the future where you're on your deathbed and I come to visit you and I say, was your life a success? And you say to me, yes, it absolutely was. And I say, tell me the first big thing that made it a success. And so if you ask yourself that question, for me, here's what came up when I first asked myself that question back when I was just getting to know Katie, or we were just beginning our relationship big time. I asked myself, what's the most important marker for me in my life, in my deathbed? It is, my life was a success because I created a loving relationship with a woman with whom I could grow and change over the years. So I created this rich marriage. So that just came to me when I was 34 years old in my first year of my relationship with Katie. And that really shaped me because I realized I wanted to do whatever it took to make that relationship work. I wanted to tap every ounce of me. That's what genius is. It's the commitment to tapping all of your resources, a commitment to going all the way with who you really are. And I keep coming back to that over and over and over again, no matter where I am in the world. Like you mentioned, this is something like my 42nd or 43rd book. But in a way, it's just as much fun as my first one, because each time the spiral grows. Now I have, several 100,000 people waiting for my next book rather than 500 people waiting for the second book I wrote way back there in 1975. So think of that. Think of life as a spiral where you're continually getting learning opportunities. And the learning opportunities, if you're open, don't come in the form of a sledgehammer. They come in the form of a feather tickle. So you're either going to get taught with a feather tickle or a sledgehammer. Pick one.
I have a mantra for that, Gay. Kind, gentle, easy, good. May all lessons come to me for my highest good and the highest good of all. Kind, gentle, easy, good. And the appendix or addendum is, I am listening, I am listening, I am listening, or I am open, I am open, I am open.
Beautiful. Well, I have a little process that I share with my close-in students that I'd like to share if we have time. Do we have time for me to do a little process with you?
Let's do that first. Why don't you tell us where can people go to find your beautiful book and to find out more?
Well, I have the biggest and best problem an author can have.
Yes.
The paperbacks are out of stock, but they just got to the warehouse. So if you're in a bookstore, ask them for it. But if you go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or one of those online booksellers, you can get it there. And also the Kindle version, everybody's got that as a Tuesday. So that's out in the world. So we've got a bunch of thousands of people who have already read the book. And I'm also going to be doing a seminar, a live free seminar for people who've read the book and sign up for it at joyofgenius.com. So that's the place to learn all about the book and go see the cool trailer there. I'm very proud of the trailer. A Hollywood guy named Cameron Keyes made the trailer, and it's a lot of fun to watch. So go to joyofgenius.com and you can order the book from there too and sign up for that free seminar.
Fantastic. And if you didn't catch joyofgenius.com, come on over to inspirenationshow.com. We'll get you over to joyofgenius.com. And congratulations on already selling out the first edition of the paperback. That is top of the world huge.
Blessings. Blessings to all my readers. Thank you so much.
Awesome. So now do you have time to do that exercise with us then?
Yes, long ago, there was a great German mystic named Meister Eckhart.
Yes.
About 200 years ago. And people should look up Meister Eckhart if they want to learn more, because he's an amazing human being and his writings are just mind-bogglingly good. But toward the end of his life, he said something to his students. He said, "Thank you is the only prayer we ever need." And so with that great gift of Meister Eckhart, I'd like to create a little process which begin to be aware of your breathing right now. You don't have to breathe any particular way, but just find a place where you notice your breathing in your nostrils or in the belly or wherever you happen to notice your breathing. And you'll notice the way the human mind is organized, that you'll be able to focus on your breathing for a moment or two, and then maybe your mind will think about something else. But when it does that, just return to the breathing. And so as you breathe, I'd like you, with a soft inner voice, about every 15 seconds or so, to just murmur the word in your mind, the words, thank you, and then come back to the breathing. So just float the phrase, thank you, into space, and then come back into space via the breathing, tuning into your breathing again for a couple of easy breaths. Then launch another thank you into your mind and back to the breathing, about every 15 seconds. And then take a moment to simply be with your breathing for a moment. Just kind of noticing your breathing, letting your mind go of any kind of focus. Enjoying your breathing. Find out any little places in your body that need to be stretched and give them little stretches. Open up your body to your breathing and gradually return yourself to your full awareness in your body and opening your eyes if they've been closed and back into your resuming your normal life.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Woohoo! This has been phenomenal, Gay. It is such a joy, such a treat. You have such joyous, plugged in, radiant, on fire energy.
Well, thank you for asking the beautiful questions.
I am honored, absolutely honored. We've got to crank it back up for the finish here. For everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get the joy of genius, and begin liberating and living in your true creativity today and shine bright. Woohoo!
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you so much, Gay. This has been phenomenal.
Thank you very much, Michael. Have a great day.
You too, Gay. Take care. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!